Hello, everybody. Patty Wallenberg or Patricia Wallenberg is here, and I am Joe Maldonado. We're from Gryphons Claw, the School of Practical Magic. We recently had a series of interviews called Interviews with Witches. And one of the things that kept coming up through our series of interviews with everybody was that astrology is definitely, most definitely, a part of not just witches, but of everybody's life. And so, Patty, I have asked Patty if she would consent to just have a little chat about what it is that she will be teaching. So, first, welcome and thank you, Patty.
Hey, nice to see you again. Hello.
Hello.
So, yes. So, astrology, I am not an astrologer, but, and it's a big but, I have had friends for decades who are. And so I've kind of learned when someone tells me, it's an Aries moon going on. When I write spell work, I look at the energies of the moon when I work, um, because each zodiac sign has an energy about it. What am I looking to accomplish? Am I looking to maybe find a new home, or when we do our house clearings?
Right.
I try to, when I do candle spells for those, I try to look for the moon in Cancer, because Cancer is all about being a homebody in your house.
Yes.
If you're looking for a job, I might look for something like an Aries personality, Aries moon, because it's about initiating and starting things and getting things done. So each of the zodiac have their own energy. I also have been getting my charts done yearly, also for decades. Our class is going to talk about your birth chart. Sometimes they'll use the word your natal chart.
Mhm.
My purpose for the class will be to teach you what all the little symbols mean when you look at a chart, because it's different language.
Mhm, mhm.
You've got different little glyphs, little symbols for each zodiac sign. Most people know their sun sign, and they might even know what it looks like. But do you know where your moon is? And do you know what your moon sign is?
And why is that important?
So your sun sign is about your outer persona. And think about the sun shining. It's how the outer world sees you. But your emotional landscape, your inner self, could be in a totally different sign. So you have then, because sometimes someone might say to you, "Oh, Patty, I'm a blatant Aries. I'm sorry, but I am." But there are some people who are a zodiac sign, and others will go, "You don't really seem to fit that personality.
Mhm.
Your personality is very different." So why? And a lot of times people kind of lean more towards their moon sign than they do their sun sign. And they're just like, well, I don't know, but this is my birth date is such and such a date.
Mhm.
And so, so it's
And if I
interesting.
can interrupt you, and why is that? Is it a result of genetics, environment, or their response to what's going on in their environment?
I mean, it could be, the astrological chart, your birth chart is a snapshot of where all the planets were at the time you were born. Um, so that's why if you were to see a professional astrologer, they will ask you for your birth time and
Yes.
place, because my sky would look different if I'm living in California than if I'm living in New York.
Right.
Um, so the time would still be the same, even with time zones. I'm living in a different location. And so the sky is going to be a little bit different based on where the earth is in relation to the rest. So it's kind of a cool thing to just look and be like, hey, check it out. Look at all my stuff.
Well, see, it's cool
So
for you, but it's overwhelming for me because I don't know. All I know is I'm a Taurus. I don't know anything about that. And people that know are a little bit more learned, whether they've learned on their own or they've studied it or whatever, they'll say, oh, yeah, and then that's the same question, what time were you born? Blah, blah, so I am so glad that you're doing this class because
yeah.
I, for one, am totally confused to the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. So
so
we'll
it,
spend so we'll spend time going over all of it.
Right.
I'm not going to read your charts for you, but I will teach you enough that, a good Google search. So if you know that your sun is in the 10th house of Aries,
Right.
you can do a Google for that, and you'll have a little bit of understanding about what that is too. What is the energy? And I'm using my own chart because it's easy for me to explain if I got a question. You asked me a question and I made up something and I'm like, oh no. But knowing where your sun is in particular, where's your strength when you were born,
Yeah.
depending what house shows up. So on an astrological chart, it is broken up into like a pie, and it's broken up into 12 houses, like a clock would be.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting that astrology is kind of older than a clock, but we've got 12 houses and we've got 12 hours.
Yeah.
So knowing a little bit, if you want to learn about yourself more, a lot of people like to do self-exploration, and an astrology chart is a nice way to kind of get some understanding about who you came in to be. There's tons of stuff that can be sussed out in a chart.
Right.
We're only going to teach you the very basics,
so that you can go out and do it.
so you can go and start learning and see even if you like it. Maybe you just look at it, I don't ever want to read one. I don't want to learn that much, but I can teach you how your things show up. So we'll go through all 12 zodiac signs. You'll learn the energies of each sign. So you may be a sun your sun might be in one sign and your moon could be in another. Do you know what that sign is? Because most people don't even know what their moon sign is. So you could be a Taurus, but your moon could be in a totally different place. And because you're only familiar with your sun sign, you don't know the component and mix that comes in with you because you've never known what your moon does.
So how does that affect your life? If you can give me an example, like for you, for example, what you are, and how does that affect like your comprehension of day-to-day things?
So using your birth chart, it helps me understand some of my strengths and weaknesses. It helps me understand a little bit more about who I am. An astrologer will come and so when I get an astrology chart done every year, I come in and they actually move the heavens. So if I get an astrology chart done for a reading today to find out what my next year looks like, they can do predictive astrology using your birth chart, showing where the planets have moved, what's happening, what could be happening. So it's funny, as people know, I move a great deal.
Yes.
It's funny because that shows up in my chart when I'm getting ready to move.
Okay.
It's not a guarantee. You always have free will, but it is interesting that sometimes when I get sick, it shows up in your chart. So a professional can read a great deal of things in your chart. I use it sometimes too. There's a field of astrology called astrocartography. So when I move sometimes, especially if I'm not moving along the same vertical, you can actually use your birth chart to find out what happens to you when you live in California, what happens to you if you live in China, what happens to you if you live in Australia.
Wow.
So there's so many ways that people have begun, well, they do, how to utilize your birth chart.
Right.
So
wow, that is fascinating.
So there's medical astrology. There are people who are medical astrologers. Right. They can look at your chart. There are people who sometimes can see in your chart, and they shouldn't tell you, but maybe an opportunity that you may be healthy or sick. You can pass. You can come on. A lot of markers turn up. It's just a matter of how it's interpreted.
Right.
But for this class is only about starting just to learn about your birth chart.
Okay. And then you go on after that, perhaps.
And then you could go on and study, obviously, other courses are available. You could do your own research, but this class will teach you the very basics of when you look at your chart, what's happening in it. Are you a morning person versus a nighttime person? That shows up in your chart. You know, a lot of people have planets and placements in their chart that are up on the top part of, you know, so let's say from 9 to 3.
Yeah.
Anything that happens in the upper part of the chart might indicate that you're more of an outgoing person or a daytime kind of person, whereas a part of your positioning shows up in the down part, those are nighttime people. That's a
Yeah.
nighttime hour. So
Yeah.
maybe it might explain why you are a morning person versus a nighttime person.
And I just wanted to, we're having a lot of glitches on video and audio also, just so everybody, in case you did not know, we are on the on the cusp of Hurricane Nicole over here. So we've been getting bans and different kinds of things since yesterday. Today it's a little bit more intense now over here where I am anyway. So, you know, hence is like, because we're cutting in and out. Just wanted to explain that to everybody. I do have, let's see, a question, but it's really actually a statement, and it's the same thing that I just said. Astrology is so hard. Looking forward to learning how to learn. There is so much, and I don't know where to start. So taking this class is a good start.
So this will start, right. This
Right.
will start to break down the pieces because you have to know each of the 12 zodiac signs. You have to understand the wording and the energies that go along with them.
Yeah.
And then you have the planet influences. So how does a moon placement affect you? How does your Saturn placement affect you?
Yeah.
How does your Mars? How does your Mercury? Your Mercury is about your communication.
Yeah.
So how is your placement of your Mercury kind of explain how you communicate?
Right.
Your Mars is about, you know, your Mars planet is about how do you fight? What is your motivator? Mars is the planet of action.
Yeah.
And then you've got your Venus. So we'll also talk about, you know, the planets, and Venus is about love. We all know that. What do we love?
Yeah.
How do we relate? So we'll also cover then all of the planets, including Pluto, because sometimes even if he is or isn't a planet, he still affects us. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we will also go through all of the houses. What does a first house mean? A second house mean? A third house mean? And it's interesting to see. And then if you have a planet there and you have your sun there or your moon there, they'll combine all of those to make a picture of.
There's an interesting question here. I sort of understand the birth chart, but how does the daily astrology work with the birth chart?
Your birth chart is fixed. It is the exact moment in time that you were born.
Okay.
Daily astrology. So I'm assuming that they're asking about, you know, my horoscope for the day.
Yeah,
kind of.
I would
But if
think
not, I will change it or say something else. So if you're asking about your daily horoscope for the day, most of them use a point of time and do a generalization. So today for Aries, today for Pisces, today for Taurus, they might be super accurate, and you might look at it and go, none of this applies to me, because you have a specific time in that sign that you were born. That when I don't know how they do the daily astrology. So I don't know if they do it at 0 degrees of each one, but it would be kind of more of a generalization. I use them as a generalization.
Okay.
An astrologer would be able to actually go in and take your birth chart, and then what they do is they move the planets to the time in which you're getting your chart done.
Okay.
The placement of them, because the planets are not fixed, they don't stay. So an astrologer would then take your chart, put in your data, and then also lays on top of that where everything is right now. Where did the sun move to? Where did Venus move to? Where did all the planets move to? And then they compare and they do their reading from there. So that becomes much more complex. And then, yes, there are lingo that goes along with things. I saw something pop up in the chart, in the chat. So there is lingo about conjunctions, retrograde, squares,
Yeah.
Those are more complex readings of your chart because it shows the friction. You have trines. So trine is a nice avenue of how things work together.
Mm-hmm.
A square is a bit more harsh. And then a conjunction just means that certain planets are within contact of each other. They're in certain degrees of closeness to each other. So maybe the moon and Saturn are kind of coming really close in the sky together.
Yeah.
So that would be a conjunction. And
Okay.
so those create extra energies happening in the heavens every day because everything again still moves.
Yes.
We had a Mercury retrograde class, didn't we?
We
So
sure did.
so we talk about that yesterday. 2 days ago, we had an eclipse. That's also a conjunction. That's an alignment of planets that happen in the heavens. And if you read a lot of astrology, that was a rough eclipse. A lot of things are blowing up for a lot of people, including we've had our elections, which is the first time ever in history our elections ever occurred on an eclipse.
Wow.
And eclipse energies are really, really big, especially, because things are coming in alignment. The stressors are really large at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the energies with eclipses don't finish on the day. The eclipse energies and the fallout and the change that happens with eclipses, if they are going to happen to you, could go over maybe 6 months, maybe a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But an astrologer would be able to tell you how that would affect you because it affects everybody differently. I may have no problem with it. Your life could be like, oh my God, the car broke down, the house blew up, my stove isn't working. Everybody is different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
When was the
again,
last Mercury in retrograde? When was that? When did that start?
a couple weeks ago, we just finished.
Okay. What was happening in June, July? Just out of curiosity. I don't know. That's a while.
There's a lot happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I read a bunch of astrology blogs to kind of keep up with things. We're doing so. They also talk about like returns. Like you have a Saturn return every 28 years
Okay.
in your life. And so Saturn is kind of the tough planet. He's the educator, and he's about your structures and your security and your footing in the world. And sometimes when it hits your Saturn return, it means Saturn has made its way around your whole chart, and it is back to the exact place when you were born. And so certain stressors may start to come up. When you're 28 years old, what is your life starting to do at 28 years old? You're kind of moving into a new phase of life for most people on average.
Yeah.
Maybe you're getting married, you're having a family, you're finally settled on your career. So, and it isn't locked into being just turning 28. It could affect you a year or two before, 6 months before, and it could carry a little bit longer. It's not a hard fix. The U.S. is experiencing what they term its Pluto return since the U.S. was created. So Pluto is the planet of chaos, death, and rebirth.
Wow.
So look at all the chaos in the world, and it's affecting the global, everybody who lives in the U.S.
Yeah.
So because not only do people have birth charts, businesses have birth charts, countries have birth charts. Anytime that there is an official creation of anything. So when I created, my business, I know the day I signed the paperwork for it. The day you bought your house has a birth chart because I signed on my house, this date and time.
Yeah.
The Constitution was signed at a certain time. So the US has a birth chart. Countries have birth charts. It's amazing if you start to think about it. It's overwhelming.
It is.
And it's kind of interesting too. It's like, it's like, so what is our birth chart like for the US? It was signed in July.
Yeah.
So it's a Cancer birth chart because it's not Leo yet.
Yeah. So and I know we were chatting right before we got on, and Patty had said that she will direct everybody to a website or a few websites that actually can do this at no cost. Create your birth chart, and then we will all sit down and we're going to go through this.
And you'll have it. And
we
you
have it.
Right. And you don't. So there are places where you can go online. You can do a search, create my free birth chart. It'll ask you where you were born. It'll ask you your date you were born. If you are super fortunate, and most people do, if you know your birth time, you can enter it into the thing and it will create for you your birth chart. Some of them will give you a free reading. Again, they're somewhat generalized, but they're not always too far off. It'll help explain a little bit for you. It's not a bad thing to do. If you don't know your birth time, sometimes your parents might have an idea. You know, if your mom or dad comes back and says, "Oh, you were born at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday,"
Yeah.
chances are you're not quite at 3 o'clock, because if we round up numbers, they're not going to say, "Well, you were born at 2:56 p.m."
Yeah.
But you can use that. If you know you were born in the morning versus in the evening, you can kind of put in a morning time. Sometimes we just put in 12 noon. You know, they kind of have an idea. It's great if it could be as precise as possible. It creates a much more accurate chart.
Yeah.
For the class, we'll go over my chart just because it's easier to do. But it'll show you where everything is placed, and then you can look at yours while we're talking and be like, "Oh, so my sun is here and I see my planet of this." So it'll
you'll
give you
understand why things are the way they are, because in that moment in time you were born. So here's the dilemma for those of us that have no idea. We just have a date. And my mom was either 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. Okay, well, thank you.
okay. Yeah, sometimes you kind of guessing on something like that, you know. Most parents have some sort of clue within an hour. You know, you were born around 11, maybe you were born around 10:30. You are able, if you are wanting something very specific, you can go back to, you know, your birth records. Not everybody has them, but you know, you can ask your county. Everyone knows what town they were born in.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, so you could kind of narrow it down, even if you can't get the exact time for your birth chart. But yes, it'll generate a chart for you. It's nice. Back in the old days, they used to hand do them. I couldn't possibly imagine writing them out by hand and you know, placing everything. It's kind of interesting too, because I have it in my chart. You can have planets that are retrograde in your chart. So I know we joke about Mercury retrograde, but you can have planets at the time of your birth that are technically retrograde. So I'm like,
and so if I can ask you a question, and so if by some chance you would have a planet that is in retrograde in your birth chart, would that explain certain things going awry at certain times? And if you know that, then you can kind of plan ahead, right? And kind of, you know, get your life a little bit more organized depending on that, correct?
Well, yeah. And each time, I mean, they do say that sometimes, you know, like if you have a Mercury retrograde in your chart, you might handle the Mercury retrogrades a little bit easier. You know, so retrograde, for those who don't know or who ask. So, you know, it's funny because it's become very prevalent these days in lingo, you know, "Oh, Mercury's in retrograde." So no planet actually goes in retrograde. All of them move in their circle, their orbits, constantly going forward. Astrology is very earth-centric. It's based on here. It's not based on the sun placement. It's based on earth placement. And every once in a while, when planets orbit, one will pass another, and visually in the sky, it will look like a planet, such as Mercury, is going backwards. So we pass it for a little while, and it'll look like the other planet is going backwards because we've passed it. And eventually that planet finally catches up, and though it's longer going retrograde, it will catch up and it will move past us in orbit. So it is a visual that happens. It is not possible for a planet to go backwards. But it is a visual occurrence for those of us on Earth based on the planets. And all the planets will do a retrograde at some point in time, I think.
And also too, I know a lot of Oh, disassociation is associated with
Yeah.
that term retrograde. So,
Mhm.
you can hear people say, like, my whole life is in retrograde right now. It's like going backwards, like nothing is working out for you. There's chaos, there's whatever, and people say don't sign any contracts during a retrograde period and so on. So I think it's that visual that you were talking about,
Mhm.
and perhaps learning a little bit more about the astrology.
Right. So if you understand, so we will cover all of the planets. So using Mercury as an example, because it's easy, if you understand the things that the planet Mercury
Yeah,
represents. So it is contracts. Mercury is communication. It
yeah,
is travel. That is why all of those things, it's your mind, it's your intellect, all of those things phase into a Mercury retrograde because they're not moving forward,
yeah, yeah, they're
you
kind of
know?
stuck or moving.
Right. So if it was a Saturn retrograde, it would be a different energy happening. If it's a Mars retrograde, which if we're not in one, we are really close to one. I'm
Mhm.
thinking it started last week. I'd have to check. There's
Okay,
apps for that, by the way.
yeah,
You know, I have a retrograde app, so I just opened it up and I'm like, oh, so these planets retrograde. Anyway, so like if Mars is going retrograde, aggression becomes more prevalent because people are not in control. So Mars is all about aggression, war. Think about the Greek god Ares,
yeah,
Mars. They're all this aggression, militant, male energies.
mhm,
And so when it goes retrograde, the curbing that we keep on it kind of falls apart a little bit.
mhm,
So tempers show up faster, fights show up faster. You're fighting with people a lot more than maybe you usually do.
uh,
So the energy of Mars, understanding what that planet is, then helps you with understanding what's happening when people around you start short fusing.
yeah, yeah,
I use the zodiac, so I not don't necessarily use, but it is handy, the knowledge I've gained from understanding astrology. When I do any of my candle rituals, when I do any of my spell work, I look for the planets and I look for the zodiac. What's happening with that particular day? How am I going to look? And I may look 2, 3 weeks out before I find the matching of things I want astrologically
mhm,
and
mhm,
planet wise so that I can create the spell biggest energetic impact behind
yes,
it.
yes,
So I use my astrology a lot. Even when we did the thinning of the veil class,
yes,
I wrote a candle spell specifically based on what was happening astrologically for the day that that spell occurred. That spell was technically only really good for Halloween
yeah,
because it incorporated what the sun was doing, what the moon was doing, the
yeah,
day of the week's energy, because, and how you write the spell. So it's all part of spell building when I
mm,
do a spell. I do a
mhm,
candle ritual. I
mhm,
look at those aspects in astrology because there is the energies inherent in them.
yeah,
I use them to work the best spell possible.
possible for that day. I am
So
sorry,
even
we
even
are,
if you don't want to read your chart,
yeah.
understanding the zodiac and the planets could help you in other aspects of what you do. And my biggest example being when I do candle rituals.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a great tool. Um, and unfortunately, I don't know enough about it, but hopefully, once I do your class, I will have a better
Hope
understanding.
so too, because I didn't do good at the class, but I'm going to hope I do a good class.
I am sorry, we are out of time, everybody. Patty's class has moved into January the
January
14th at 11, and rather than making it 2 days, 2 parts, we
parts will
have
do it.
kind of combined everything to have it in one day. So that'll make it easier for you. And also, it being offered in January, the start of the year. For those that don't look at other times of the year as the start of the year, January, the beginning of 2023, we thought it would be a good time to
Mhm.
also, reintroduce this factor. And Patty, I'm sure we're going to be talking to you again about this. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. For those of you that don't know, I will stop recording soon. And those that are with us today, please stay tuned. You can unmic and you can continue asking Patty questions for a few more minutes. Patty, thank you so very much for doing this today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Anytime.